find your link to handouts for today. So you're welcome to open that up. This session will be recorded and posted to Pat and YouTube, hopefully within a couple of days. We'll get started here in another minute or so. So welcome. Okay, my watch says 8:30, so we're going to go ahead and begin with some opening remarks. So welcome and thank you for devoting your time and commitment to the implementation of evidence-based practices. My name is Jen Collins, and on behalf of the statewide MTSS team, our intent this year is to offer a variety of research to practice opportunities that span the K-12 spectrum. Teams will receive a review of specific evidence-based practices, fidelity tools to support implementation, the opportunity to formally evaluate the impact of the evidence-based practices on student outcomes, and be provided with an opportunity to share your experiences and outcomes with your peers. Over the course of the 22-23 academic school year, we'll be addressing class-wide intervention, Tier 3 problem solving, responsiveness to intervention, secondary writing and reading, leveraging evidence-based practices and principles within a UDL MTSS framework, and formative assessment. For our teams who complete a given research to practice experience, a digital badge will be awarded to honor your efforts and commitment to enhancing student outcomes. Thanks so much again for joining today and for all that you do as educators. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Karen Brady, who serves as the Central Region MTSS lead. And Karen, take it away.
Thank you, Jen. Nice to see everybody here today. Just want to remind you that closed captioning is available for you if that is something that helps you with your presentation today. Dr. Amanda Vanderheyden is a policy advisor and thought leader who actively conducts research focused on improving learning outcomes for students. In addition to publishing 9 books and over 100 scholarly articles and chapters, she regularly delivers webinar, panel, and keynote sessions, including addresses to state school psychology associations and state departments of education in 35 states, Singapore, and China. She has also served as a standing panel member for NIH, IES at the U.S. Department of Education, an advisor and reviewer for NCII, USAID, the IRIS Center, the Dyslexia Foundation, and numerous state departments of education. Dr. Vanderheyden has also served on a number of boards, including the RTI Advisory Board for the National Center for Learning Disabilities and SEDL, one of 10 regional laboratories funded by the U.S. Department of Education, since merged with the American Institutes for Research. Dr. Vanderheyden has authored a number of policy guides and position statements and delivered testimony on the use of multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, and response to intervention, RTI, to identify students for special education. She is credited with developing models of academic screening that are widely used in schools, conducting innovative research in mathematics screening and progress monitoring using mastery measurement, and the creation of Spring Math. Dr. Vanderheyden is president of Education Research and Consulting in Fairhope, Alabama, and has a faculty affiliation with Wheelock College of Education at Boston University. So we want to give a warm welcome to Dr. Vanderheyden, a friend of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Can you remind me, am I taking a break formally midway through or no? Please say no. Would you all like me to take a break?
Yes,
yeah.
We'll need to take a break. We'll need to take a break. We can decide, it should be around the 10 o'clock mark if we do 10 or 15 minutes, but we should take.
Perfect. Okay, so 10 o'clock, which is 9 o'clock my time. I'm just gonna write this stuff down. I'm getting old. So I don't mess it up. All right. Well,
you're not alone with these.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yes, Pennsylvania is definitely one of my most favorite places to work in. You might see why. Or at least this is evidence of how much I like to work in Pennsylvania. This is our user map currently, and I'm always so proud to see how much use we have in Pennsylvania, and your neighbors are starting to emulate you and copy you, which is great because, as I said last week, my mission, which is all consuming, is to raise math achievement. The average fourth grader in this country is not proficient. We can fix that. It's so fixable. If you might think this is funny, my almost 16-year-old daughter, people never know what school psychologists do for a living. And my son is at college and he said, Mom, I don't know how to tell people what you do. And I said, well, don't worry about it. Just, do your own thing. And then someday you'll tell your own story. You won't need to explain what your parents do. And I said to my daughter, do you know what I do? And she said, yes, you are a math psychologist. No, that doesn't exist. And you write math textbooks. No, I don't. Math textbooks are terrible. Maybe someday before my career is over. But actually, I really believe that MTSS is the best way to improve math achievement. So that is what I spend all of my time doing. And we do spend a lot of time and have a lot of opportunity to see what's happening in Pennsylvania. So we have this, by the way, I am a terrible title giver. So, you're looking at the person who named class-wide math intervention. It's not very clever. I wish I had thought of a better name, because other people will say they're doing class-wide math intervention and they may not be doing it using the evidence-based ingredients that we study. Similarly, we have built a big dashboard. We call it the big dashboard. Crappy title, but basically it's allowing us now, with enough use, especially of class-wide math intervention in schools across the United States and around the world, we are able to really look at what is happening at scale, what is happening in terms of dosage, what is happening in terms of effects and results. And I thought I would just give you a little tiny sneak peek at your own data in Pennsylvania. We can parse this in so many ways. Like, we can look at individual systems and their declining risk over time by grade level. We can compare, Pennsylvania against the other, states around the rest of the country who are using class-wide math intervention. We can also look at, where you get stuck, which skills are just universally hard everywhere by grade level. So I'm going to give you some of those updates today. But first, I kind of want to show you some good news in Pennsylvania. The blue, by the way, everything we report to you, if you are a spring math user, we always report percent proficient or percent not at risk. And we like to see the growth go up. Well, in this case, I'm showing you risk, right? Excuse me. So we want to see this actually go down, right? We want to see risk decline. So this is from last year, 21-22. I could have run it for this year, and maybe I'm happy to. If somebody wants it, I'll run it and share it with folks. But the blue is the percentage of kids at risk on any screening measure at the fall screening. So if you ace, 3 and you are at risk on 1, you go in the at-risk category. So that's a pretty rigorous expectation. And honestly, that's our aspiration, is that eventually 100% of children are able to score in the not at risk range on all of our screening measures at fall, winter, and even spring. And these are rigorous by design, and they actually become increasingly difficult. So when you see risk go down from fall to winter, that's really compelling, because the winter measures, as you know, if you use our tool, are more rigorous than the fall measures, okay? And of course, we see this at scale. We see stronger results, certainly K3. Isn't that interesting? We are also seeing that in some other places, and we definitely have hypotheses about why that is. But, one of the pieces of national good news that we see is that most kindergarten teachers in our tool, our platform, are able to finish all of the skills, meaning they get the median score in their class to mastery on every single skill in the sequence in kindergarten. And that is beautiful, because that conveys this beautiful risk reduction to that group of kids when they land in first grade. So what will be interesting to see over time is this cohort of K3, as they move up into the higher grades, they should be more prepared. They should be ready to profit from grades 4, 5, and 6. I mean, really, this is the old Joe Torgerson data, right? Early intervention closes the Matthew effect. It catches kids up And it makes future intervention potentially less necessary or essential. And it certainly reduces rate of SLD, especially in reading. We know that. So, you've seen this before. If you've seen me speak, I've been hammering this point for years, but I really believe that learning is the most predictable outcome of high quality instruction. And so when we don't see learning, our question shouldn't be what's wrong with the learner. It should be what's wrong with the instruction. It's fixable. When we give high quality instruction, we're going to get better learning. I think it's worth it to point out that soft constructs are just a safe place to fall. And in my opinion, these run rampant in math education. So we hear people refer to things like deep understanding, creativity, collaboration, even conceptual understanding, without defining those terms, without operationalizing. What does that mean? How do we know that deep understanding was either attained or not attained, or to what degree was it attained? My methodologist friends would say you need that, not just a yes, no. You need to know degrees of understanding if you're going to claim to have some outcome that reflects deep understanding. So these are terms that are often thrown around in professional development models and training, and thought leaders will throw these out without clear definitions. And to me, these become a giant distraction. These become a way for systems to not really be accountable to the results that are possible, right? Because they're focused on this thing that they don't even know what it is, how to measure it, how to build it, how to determine whether or not it has even happened, okay? I'll say if you cannot define it, you simply cannot attain it. I mean, that is a basic behavioral principle, right? So I think instead of talking about soft constructs, we should be talking about, well, what does skill acquisition look like? What does independent performance look like? What does mastery look like? Spoiler alert, I'm gonna give you a little update that we've discovered some things about measurement that help us know that. What is mathematical flexibility? We have a definition for that. That is something we can define. And we should define it. We are after that. That's our goal, not just this sort of rote production of computation performance, right? We really want robust learning and a child having the capability to modify their response to solve a problem, or to solve a novel problem type they've never encountered before, to experience faster learning of related content, right? That's more complex, to be able to solve a problem in more than one way, depending on the level of precision that's required in the answer. We can define mathematical flexibility. And by the way, I said this yesterday to an audience, that we can absolutely use explicit instruction to build these things that we have defined, okay? We can literally use explicit instruction to cultivate conceptual understanding and mathematical flexibility. That is exactly what we do in our individual intervention protocols. That is a model for that. So what is equity? How do we define that? What is effective instruction? To me, that's an easy definition. It is instruction that produces learning. If the dots don't go up, the instruction was not effective, period. We need to back up and look at, well, when it was implemented as intended, did we get an upward trend? If that answer is no, we need to be willing to make adjustments to that instruction. What is aligned instruction? What is an adequate number of opportunities to respond? I guarantee you it's more than on average we are able to give children in most core math instruction environments, for whatever reason. And when I say it's more than we're able to, no, we are able to do it. We are not doing it, right? It involves being very intentional about having high quality practice opportunities and materials. And honestly, I think that's part of the effect that we get with something like class-wide math intervention, is that we are providing that. And when it is delivered as a supplement, it's part of why we consider it a tier 1.5, in addition to other reasons. It really is a universal benefit. It is a necessary feature of MTSS because it helps us know better than screening who's really at risk when there's a lot of risk. But it also, by the way, helps the teacher in a very evidence-based, clean way to maximize opportunities to respond to get more growth. What are the most essential skills at each grade level, and when should students master them? I would suggest to you that our class-wide intervention sequences are a great place to start, because we have been working on those since 2002. And we rarely make changes now to those sequences because they really do hit the mark, okay? we're confident about that. You may want to add some things to that, because we do emphasize a particular sequence of skills that really are about taking children from numeracy to algebra, and we are keenly focused on those skills. There is always space to cover other content, of course. So the problem is, if you go to Common Core, it's overwhelming. And if you look at often, and I have seen leaders in districts do this, and it can be very powerful, in any content area, what do we say we're going to do instructionally? What do we say we're going to cover? And now let's map that out. And is it even possible, right? I saw a leader do that back in 2002, and I was a participant on this leadership team. And I'll never forget it. His name was Joe Sassone in Vail Unified School District. And what we said we would do, there weren't enough minutes to do it. And he demonstrated that empirically. And it caused us to say, okay, we've got to be more intentional about what we need to do every single day and pay attention to that. And it needs to be viable. It needs to be possible, or we need to figure out how to make space for that. What is fluency? These are more useful things to me to define. Okay, beware, I say, the tactic of maligning any possibility of measurement. So when you go and you're talking to teams that like these soft constructs, which are very popular with parents, they are, if you say you're somebody who studies math at a cocktail party, it's not pretty because people will say, well, I don't understand the Common Core way of teaching. And you go, well, actually, it's not an instructional method. It's just a set of outcomes. And how could you be opposed to kids mastering multiplication 0 to 10 in 3rd grade? We've always expected that. That's not a new space, right? But when you are talking to people who are perhaps thought leaders who are more married to their philosophies than the measurable results that they can demonstrate as a result of those what they believe are good ideas being implemented in practice, when you run into that, one of the things that I think is kind of a predictable course of events, given my own Twitter battles, is that often they will go to a place of saying, well, you can't really measure what we're talking about, or maybe we should change the measure. And those are just natural human reactions. Like, have you ever gotten on a scale and thought, I'll just admit out loud, I have done this. My scale is broken. There's no way I weigh that much. It can't be right. And I replaced it, got on the new scale, same number, okay? This is normal human behavior to sort of be like, well, the measure must be wrong. But sometimes measures sort of tell us truth. I mean, good measures exist that are not biased, okay? And just because they show us that there are disparities in achievement, what we're going to call opportunity gaps, what they're really reflecting to us is that access to highly effective instruction, and by access, I mean a child experiencing highly effective instruction, is unstable. And this is systematically the case. I won't retire till I feel like we've made a dent in this. It's my goal in life, right? But truly, because those inequities exist, because unstable access to highly effective instruction exists in a systematic way, good measures are going to reflect those inequities. So what we should do is do something about it, not indict the measure for sort of telling us the truth, right? That there is an opportunity gap. I love this quote. I pulled it for you because it actually was written by one of your leaders, Nicole Holland-Sims. You can actually get this article in the communique. And if you're not a NASP member, lots of your people have written for communique over the last couple of years. Really great papers. Another great one is, I think it's Karudar and Campbell. I think that's the order, but if not, it's the other way. They wrote a dynamite piece on coaching for math performance. Jen Collins wrote a piece last year on SLD identification, and especially tier 3 intervention, and how difficult that is for systems to do, but how important it is. All of those you can get from the communique if you are a NASP member. If you are not able to access that, you can reach out to the author and they will send it to you. Or you can go to, sometimes authors have a ResearchGate site. I have one, and you can get some articles from that site. You can actually get this article from my ResearchGate site. If I don't think, for some reason, I don't think Dr. Holland-Sims has a ResearchGate site. She should, but this is her quote. And she said, when we hear the terms equity, inclusion, diversity, and belonging, often there is an assumption that the dialogue will center around school climate, culture, and psychological safety. While these are critical components of equitable practices, the educational process of providing sound academic instruction and assessment cannot be lost in the conversation. I love her positioning on this, because a lot of people who study and work in social justice can drop that thread, or can be, and really her work has mostly been focused in PBIS and leadership. But her perspective is absolutely right, that fundamental academic subject matter related to literacy, science, social studies, and mathematics create pathways for college and career readiness. However, these pathways are not always adequately available to certain students based on a variety of factors. And these factors include methods of instruction. Yay, yes. Access to highly qualified staff. Yes. Educational programming and resource allocation. Okay, so everybody was reacting to this a couple weeks ago. Oh, I should have put the updated one in, which is out, yesterday. My husband asked me this morning over a cup of coffee, gee, I thought this news already came out. Why is it in my feed again about the NAEP scores are down? And I said, well, it's because it's our national panic at the moment. But what I am saying to people, like the point difference is, this is a different measure. It is one of the NAEP measures that came out a little earlier. The two that came out yesterday are the ones that we're mostly accustomed to seeing. And I'm going to show you a graph of through 2019 on that one in a second. But it showed, I believe, an 8-point drop and I can't remember, maybe a 5-point drop, or anyway, similar, very similar scale. The numbers are down. There's a national panic. It's all over the news. But what I'm telling people is, if you were worried about this, you're being distracted. What you should be worried about is this, okay? And what you're looking at here is a picture of my son when he was a baby, and a picture of him last spring at his high school graduation. And so from the time he was born, 2003, until last year, or 2000 through 2019, there was no improvement in math proficiency for the average 4th grade kid in this country, which still remains below proficient. And that's what should be in the headlines. That's what we should be worried about, right? I don't want to hear about the largest drop since 1991, because that's a big giant distraction. What we should be saying is, why were we so flat for an entire generation from birth to grade 12 of kids who we poorly served, and we can forecast we created economic barriers in their lives to the opportunities that they may have wanted, because math proficiency, most likely lack of math proficiency, got in their way. Well, the great news is we can find these children. We know who they are, because learning is the most predictable outcome of highly effective instruction. So is risk. And if we measure the right things and we pay attention to that, we can do something about it. And guess what? A lot of the groundwork, a lot of the foundation for whether or not children are going to benefit from advanced math coursework and meet that college readiness benchmark on the ACT is determined by grade 5, okay? So what we really are saying is, our national conversation should be about, most of our students are really not ready for advanced math coursework. Most of our students are not really on track to meet the college readiness benchmark on the ACT. And oh, by the way, taking a remedial math course when you get to college is a huge risk factor. It is the #1 predictor, correlate, that suggests you will not complete a 2 or 4-year college degree in any academic major, not just a STEM field, okay? So this is a big deal, which to me, then, all of that says our goal should be about proficiency in grade K, proficiency in grade 1 for all students, proficiency in grade 3, 4, 5, 6, right? We really want to establish fundamental mastery of these basic understandings that we know drive performance for kids in more complex work over time. Okay. Now, why is this so hard? Okay, well, this is hard because there's such a climate of mythical thinking in math education these days. And, you hate to demean a field, and I don't intend to do that. I know there are, first of all, wonderful math teachers. Teachers are my heroes, and I have truly all my favorite leaders and people are teachers, right? So this is not about demeaning teachers, but I do think there is a danger that math education is often promoting tactics that are misaligned with the science of how people learn. And that's, so we, a group of scholars who work in this space have helped start a website called thescienceofmath.com. And on that site, you can look at myths. Many of your people in Pennsylvania are members of that site. Jared Campbell is a founding member of that site. So you can go to that site and you can look at some of these common myths that you might run into, because teachers really are afraid to harm children. And when they hear in their training program that timed activities cause anxiety, that may cause them to not use timed activities in their classroom, which using timed activities has a really important place in building mathematical proficiency and mastery. So does this sound familiar? I mean, this is what Hanford so compellingly described in The Science of Reading, is that these tactics that are being promoted that are not evidence-based are not simply benign or bad, right? They rob space and they compete directly with the use of what are evidence-based tactics, like timed practice. In the case of math, it would be a great example of that. Another great example is that some teachers really believe that if you directly teach an algorithm, you are bringing harm to children. And so what happens is you've got all of these teachers, regardless of what the thought leaders say on Twitter, you have all of these teachers working out in the world who truly, even if they don't say it out loud to you, they worry that if they directly teach an algorithm in the early grades, that they are harming children. And there's this notion that they must establish this thing called conceptual understanding, which is usually not well defined. Like if you really probe, well, what do you mean by that? And how do you know? And what does that look like? They really cannot give you good operationalized answers, right? Which means they can't know. And if they can't know, then how is it really driving their instructional decisions every day, right? Just logically. But they really believe that they must establish this thing called conceptual understanding before they can ever teach procedural skill. And we know from decades now of well-replicated independent research team, experimental work, demonstrating very compellingly that when you target conceptual understanding and you define it, you actually get gains in procedural skill. And when you target procedural skill, you actually get gains in conceptual understanding. So we now know from the very best research that we must do both every day. We should not avoid the teaching of algorithms. When you teach a child procedural skill, you do not then compromise their capacity to acquire what people will say is deep understanding. There's a notion that somehow if you can establish this thing called conceptual understanding, avoiding teaching the algorithm, using inquiry-based instruction and such, and maybe something that's called productive struggle that you've heard of, that somehow this establishes deeper, more enduring, more robust, more serviceable learning. And it's not true. And somebody needs to say that out loud. It's not true. The evidence does not suggest that. And it's interesting because the last myth here is that explicit instruction only works for struggling learners. That is not true. The hallmark of great instruction is that it produces stable effects on learning. And that's the beautiful thing about MTSS, which I don't know MTSS models that don't emphasize the use of explicit instruction, because it is one of the most powerful tactics ever studied in education. And so they all use that to some extent. And that's the beautiful thing about MTSS, because it will go and find that risk and it will fix it where it finds it using explicit instruction. So this is a myth. If you'd like more information about some of these, I've actually linked you to Patent podcast under each one, and I've given you an extra one under the explicit instruction link there. And I've also given you a link to an article here, which is one that I wrote with Robin Cotting, who I know often presents in Pennsylvania. She's so brilliant. I tell you, Sarah Powell And I believe the other authors are Elizabeth Hughes and Corey Peltier. And I hope I'm not forgetting someone, but they wrote a paper and used the words math myths for a center in Australia that is being circulated now in social media. It's very well done. It is open, you can access it. It's not behind a paywall. And it's a beautiful article that further makes this case that we have to be willing to de-implement in effect these low value practices, which we are calling modern math myths, before we can make space for more effective instruction. Okay. The other thing I like to point out is, for me, these are the models of instruction that don't work. And I wish they did. Oh my gosh, it would be so tidy. I mean, I'm somebody who believes that technology can be leveraged to improve outcomes for students. That's the basis of my work for the last 15 years. However, I do not believe that you can turn the learning or the teaching over to the computer and then the learning will just directly happen for the student. I wish it did. It really would make life much simpler for all of us. And I do believe you could substitute the word computer for program. I mean, if you think about it, that's why most of our math curricula have extremely weak effect sizes, nil effect sizes on student achievement. So when I am asked about which curriculum to adopt, especially, oh my gosh, the chess game that people get into where they're trading one for another, of a screening program or a core program. And in effect, they're trading things that are of equal effect sizes. So, or maybe sometimes worse, but mostly equal effect sizes. So it's just moving chess pieces on the board and going nowhere, right? So what I say is, you can't just deploy this model, buy the right thing and expect that the learning is going to improve as a result. I wish it were that easy, but it's not. So this is how I think about it. And this is where I do my work. I believe the teacher is the heart and soul of every instructional change model that exists in the world that we have ever seen be successful. And I base this on the fact that if you are a researcher and you enter measures or data about the quality of the instruction that unfolds between the teacher and the student. For example, something as simple as number of opportunities to respond. That's a powerful predictor of learning. Well, to get the teacher to maximize number of opportunities to respond, we can use these things over here, right? And one of them might be a technology tool. Like this is the basis for Spring Math. This is part of what in our model of change, it doesn't look exactly like this, but we are leveraging specific ingredients using technology to improve the teacher's ability to deliver the instruction that is needed in the most optimal way. And if the teacher is responsive to how the student responds or grows or doesn't grow as a result of deploying these tactics, then that's the iterative cycle that helps the teacher find a new approach, deploy it, see if it worked. So these are more work. These are more complicated, more complex than computer to student, but beware of tools that claim to deliver results from computer to student because their data really universally are dismal. Okay, encourage stakeholders to focus on high yield actions. So for example, we spend a lot of time in my world tending to the validity of the eligibility decision. Sometimes I feel like my entire field is distracted by that conversation when really no one's really tending to, the instruction. What are the stakes of the instruction, right? If we focused on that, we might prevent the need to even have the eligibility decision. And truth be told, making that eligibility decision is generally not the game changer that either changes the child's future trajectory or not. If it were, we would all be fighting to get our kids, eligible. But actually, the game changer is instruction. A really powerful intervention changes outcomes for the student. So I'd like to see us shift to talk about that and allocate some of our training and expertise in our skill sets and our resources to promote that if we can. Maximizing support for instruction that benefits the greatest number of learners is high yield. We see this in our tool. We see much greater uptake of class-wide intervention than we do of individual intervention. We have extremely powerful scripted individual interventions in our tool, and it's not really a tool, it's a platform. But interestingly, we have much easier, believe it or not. And it's funny because you talk to school psychologists and they will say, I just don't know if I could get a teacher to do class-wide intervention. I'm not the teacher's boss. Well, guess what? I don't think any system change works because you have authority, because you're the boss. Because at the end of the day, teachers close their door and they do what they think is best for their students, right? Or what is easiest for them to do, or what is available for them to do, or what they have time to do. That's what drives teacher behavior, not you having authority or not. So you might find it very interesting to know. It has been very surprising and also, encouraging to me to see that 100% of kids for whom just about we recommend class-wide intervention get it. Isn't that amazing? They don't all get it with the same dosage. They don't all get it with the same quality, which we can quantify, but they all get it. They all start it when we say they should. And that tells me that screening, that's the other thing they do without any trouble in 100% of systems screen their kids. So the screening is not the issue. The deployment of class-wide intervention is not the issue. The sustaining high quality class-wide intervention is a challenge for many systems. We do see improvements year to year. So veteran implementers get some better traction in subsequent years. We do see that children carry those benefits into the next grade level. So we see that for our money, class-wide intervention is a great place to leverage and emphasize your influence around getting benefits to children. It is very, very high yield. Okay, I would like to see one of my problems to solve is how do we get more uptake of individual intervention? And I'll just tell you what I suspect is there's not an awful lot of individual intervention that goes on in schools because of scheduling and how difficult it is to make space and time. And one of the big mistakes that we see with our tool, mine is designed as a universal, comprehensive MTSS system. So we have systems who say, okay, I'm going to outsmart that. I already have this other screening, so I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to choose who I think needs intervention. And it's going to be my lowest 20% of kids. And then I'm going to give those kids, spring math. And the mistake there it is a misuse of spring math to use it that way, because what happens is inevitably teachers do not have the resources to deliver intensive individualized support for 20% of their learners in their environment. So what they end up doing is creating these weird rosters. These are not kids who tend to get core math instruction together. And then they put those kids in class-wide intervention. Sometimes they even put them in at a grade level that's not their grade level. That is not evidence-based best practice. This is not going to totally move the bar for you. If you want to move the bar, move the dial on your students' learning, you have to be willing to implement in a way that will give you that return. And we can quantify that in a number of ways. And what we will say, not just for spring math, but for advice in general, class-wide intervention in reading, writing, and math is a universal intervention that belongs in the setting in which children are getting their core instruction, including special education students who happen to be enrolled and participating in the general education classroom for math instruction is absolutely supported, and we see enormous benefits to these children. I'm sure I have it on a graph that I can show you in a second. We are learning that some teachers just have a lot, and systems have a lot of trouble deploying individual interventions. This is a new slide. I got new content for you all because you're always my advanced audience, and I just love Pennsylvania so much. Someone should study this. Like, we actually have these data. I have plenty to still continue to study, but some teachers do it well. We don't know exactly which conditions are associated with the more, successful uptake and implementation of individual intervention, but that would be a good place to start, right? Like, what would that who do they look like? Who are the people who are doing high quality individual intervention, and how can we borrow from that? All right, so now here's a reversey world graph, and this is simply showing you, and I've shown this for a number of years, actually comes from Pennsylvania, for a K-4 center. So we have kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and fourth grade on the x-axis. And the blue is % proficient on the beginning of year Acadience math composite. And the orange is post couple of years of class-wide math intervention. And so this is a picture of how kids get this benefit. When these kids in first grade had class-wide math intervention in kindergarten the year before, now they're coming in more prepared and ready to benefit from the math instruction that is coming their way at that grade level. And I say this to teachers all the time, you want to teach the blue kids or you want to teach the orange kids at your grade level? And you want to teach the orange kids, because otherwise, math being relentlessly hierarchical, you are losing your bandwidth. You're losing your instructional power and punch and precision and efficacy by having to go back and backfill on prerequisites that kids did not master. And the reason you don't see a big gain in kindergarten is that we didn't work with 4-year-olds. So this is just really a lovely control for the rest of this graph. So it does show you, we get this enormous protective benefit that follows kids. Just like risk follows kids, the good news is benefit follows kids too. So excellent science-based core instruction to me this is my definition. This is what I'm looking for. By definition, it advantages all students. That means kids on IEPs. That means kids who are high achieving, okay? Avoids inefficiencies in instruction. If you can get, the same effect with a 10-minute lesson that you might also get for a 40-minute lesson, you should really think about doing the 10-minute lesson, because it is a zero-sum game. And if you spend too long on things that you really didn't need to, there was a more efficient way to do it, what you do is you lose the opportunity to cover more, to give additional skills to your students. That's the trade you're making, and you might be making that trade on, in the Southeast on August 15th. So you have to be aware of that every day. You can't afford to just sort of do what you like if there are available more efficient alternatives. And that is something to think about in the space of math. That's one of the big arguments really against inquiry-based instructional models, right? Kirshner calls them minimally guided instructional models, is that at best they're inefficient. And we also know that they also don't produce strong effects on learning. So avoiding unstable instructional effects, absolutely. That's sort of redundant with advantages all students, but specifically we should disaggregate and look, and you should see that the effects become stable. That's the hallmark of a good intervention or instructional tactic. And to me, MTSS is easily the best way to do this. So I do have a little video to show you, and I've probably shown you this before, and I just like it because you can kind of comment on the chat on things that you observe. I pulled this off YouTube. I took a screen capture of my screen because I don't ever want to humiliate or shame someone, but this is sort of a model, like if you're a new teacher, and I want you to view this from the position of imagining that you've just come out of your training program, and you do believe it's really important not to just teach the algorithmic solution, and you want to build conceptual understanding, and this was not something you were taught how to do very well. So you might go to the web and Google excellent conceptual understanding for multi-digit multiplication, which is what I did, and several years ago now, and this is what came up. And so I show it because I want you to comment in the chat on how much you think this is actually effective, or what things you would have questions about, or even red flags about as you watch this teacher.
Today, I'm going to show you a little bit about one of the strategies I'm going to be using to teach your children about multi-digit multiplication. It's a little different from what you were taught in school, but stick with me. I think it's a really good strategy. Okay, so today we're going to look at using the area array model to help solve multi-digit multiplication problems. I know that some of us were taught in school how to use the regrouping instead of the problem this way. But in 4th grade, we have a lot of students that are still visual learners. And so I want to give them something visual to make this a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create this box. And I have 4 boxes because I have 4 numbers over on this side. So if I had had one more number up here, I would have done 3 boxes going down and 2 across. So I put 50 10s up here and 4 1s. Again, we're using that expanded form of writing the numbers that we learned in our place values. At the top, I have 1 10 and 8 1s. And then I'm going to multiply across. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with multiplying these 2 numbers. Now, instead of multiplying 50 times 10, I'm actually just going to multiply 5 times 1, which we know is 5. And then I'm going to add these 2 zeros. And again, that's using our place value that we learned in our lesson before this. Then I'm going to go 4 times 1, which we know is 4. And I've got 1 0, so I'm going to add that. Then I come over here and I'm going to do 5 times 8, which I know is 40. And I'm going to add my 1 0. Then I have 4 times 8, which is 32. And I'm not going to add any zeros because I don't have any zeros there. Okay, now that I've got my boxes filled out, we're going to bring them down here. Okay, so for some of the students, I might actually say, go ahead and just put your addition signs between each box to remind you of what your next step is. So our next step is we're going to pull everything down. So you've got the 500, the 400, 40, and 32.
Okay, I'm going to cut her off
Then
because you've seen it, and I don't see the chat blowing up, but I can tell you everything that screams at me. I might be looking at the chat wrong. I don't know, but basically, there are more steps involved in the way this teacher has presented multi-digit multiplication. This requires more steps to remember how to do or to be able to do than does simply teaching the algorithm, right? And honestly, it's a lesson about place value, and much of the place value, yes, it's totally, masked. It's made opaque. There's so many just very subtle language things too. Did you catch the visual learner comment? Did you catch the, she starts with, I'm gonna have, have a 50 and a 8, or 50 and a 10 and a 4 and an 8. And then she says 5 times 1 and add 2 zeros. What? So no, this is not an excellent model of how to establish an understanding of place value in multiplication, right? Okay, so thank you for your comments. Maybe continue to throw them out. Let me just hide that. All right, so we say do it this way, and this comes from one of our protocols. I just took a picture, but when a child encounters something like 20 times 11, which can feel intimidating, you can help this seem very accessible to the learner by helping them, reminding them, 3 times 5 can be solved as 3 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 3. We can write it as repeated addition. We can find it on a number line, and they know how to do that. They're facile with that. They're mastery for that skill, ideally. And then you say, but 20 times 11, we can also solve on a number line. We know that 20 times 11 is 11 sets of 20, which we can count. We can map this. We can find the quantity. So we recommend, this is a model of explicit instruction to build conceptual understanding, quantity discrimination. Determining is one quantity resulting product greater than another without actually solving the problem, and then being able to say how much less or how much more a quantity is given multiplication problems that look very intimidating, right? Having children work the partial products in an unconventional order by starting with the tens and noticing that the final result is the same, and you can tie this to a number of principles in mathematical understanding. And most importantly, this is the part she was trying to do, but I think obscured with her boxes and her other tactics and her language, she tried to use expanded notation. So she did try at first to decompose the quantity, each factor, into tens and ones. And that's the main thing children need to do to grasp and understand how the algorithm is working for them. And then of course they need practice. They need lots of practice directly solving the algorithm. So I often do say to systems, this is an updated slide, and I just say it to be encouraging, because I really have come to think about success in math as being the mastery of 145 skills from numeracy to algebra. And I like to present it that way because that means, you know, you have 9 years, K-8, to master 145 skills. And that is doable. That is something that we should be able to do. And we should be mixing, interleaving conceptual and procedural skill instruction every day. We should not be making teachers afraid to teach the algorithm. We should give teachers instructional models that show them how to use explicit instruction to build conceptual understanding with, you know, intentionally doing that work. Minimizing errors during learning. You know, the problem with minimally guided instruction is that they invite errors early in the learning sequence. This is deadly to learning in both animal models and human models. We know this, so it's fascinating to me that it is so emphasized as an appropriate acquisition tactic. It's also fascinating to me that the very people who worry about timed activities causing anxiety don't seem to have any worry about giving children work they haven't been taught how to do and letting them kind of wrestle around with it and try to figure it out. I mean, that would give me anxiety, but I never hear that worry, which is very interesting to me. So what I try to do is help teachers, if they love minimally guided instructional techniques or popular tactics like flipping a classroom, which we know mostly benefit teacher-proof kids or kids who were going to learn it anyway. So it's not that they had a great response necessarily to the flipped classroom. Rather, it's that they maybe did not suffer the harm of it in the way that children who required explicit instruction do. So what I say is it's always useful to add explicit instruction to your model. That way you don't leave anybody behind. And if you must use some of these minimally guided instructional techniques, well, gosh, they sure would be great generalization opportunities. So we just try to get teachers to take that if they love it and just move it down the road a little bit, verify that kids have mastery, and then use the flipped classroom or the productive struggle opportunity if they want to. Build fluency. So we say intentionally every day, 1/3 of your lesson should be about acquisition, 1/3 should be about fluency building, and 1/3 should be about generalization opportunities. And by definition, by necessity, in an unavoidable way, this must target those three buckets will target different skills. They have to, because acquisition instruction is for new skills and skills that children have not yet learned how to do. And fluency building is for skills for which children are responding independently and correctly. And mastery level skills are for generalization type challenge opportunities. Okay. Definitely emphasize explicit instruction, and you must be aware most teachers are just not well prepared, have not been well prepared or well supported to deliver evidence-based instruction in reading. I mean, well, it's true in reading. Yes, a study came out a few years ago, something like 60% of new graduates said they had, who taught in the elementary grades, self-reported that they were not taught and actually how to teach children how to read. It's remarkable, but certainly it's the same case for math. This is true, and it is a crisis really that hopefully we will see traction from higher ed and these wonderful pressures coming from the science of reading movement, which we are also shamelessly trying to emulate and get the momentum for the science of math. Certainly, we want to see that happen. Okay, so the next bucket here, to kind of tie a bow on what makes for effective core instruction. Now let's talk about screening, and I'd like to give you some updates on things that we are learning, because we are always conducting research. So, and then I didn't mention at the beginning, we are going to have some breakouts. You're going to have an opportunity to kind of powwow with your colleagues, your teams, which will be short, but hopefully long enough opportunities to start a conversation on 3 topics. The first one is going to be the screening updates, the assessment updates. The second one is going to be for the instructional hierarchy, because this is such a to me, most important innovation in education in a century. So I want to give you a chance to reflect on that after I explain that to you. And then finally, the last part is really implementation science and how we are really needing to, it's time to really push that envelope so that we can get better implementation for kids. So to start with screening, how do we go from a sea of children that look like that to a picture that looks like this, right? Where it's really clear that these are the 3 children over here on the right who are in this circle who have some risk. They are not in the instructional range. The rest of their class is, the median score is, looks like it's at mastery actually, or right on the threshold of mastery. So these are the children for whom we need to do some diagnostic assessment and some intervention. We do still see this every once in a while. It does happen. We've always seen this from the beginning, but more commonly in math, we tend to see lots of risk when we screen. So how does, briefly, how does screening work? And this is reading. So we can rank order scores. We end up with, this normal distribution of scores where most of the performances are clustered in the middle, and then a red score is a really low score. The red child is lower performing than the purple child, who is lower performing than the green child, who is also a very high performing kind of outlier score, although there's a couple beyond in both directions. And then we say, all right, well, here's the rule. We're going to put it right here, and if you score below this, then we will say you have failed the screening. And if you score above or better than this threshold, we're going to say that you have passed the screening, okay? And what happens is this allows us to see where our errors are in our predictions. So we have said that these kids are going to pass the screening, and actually this is a real data set in reading, and these are the actual children in this data set who went on to fail the year-end test. So these are false negative errors in this particular data set. And then over here, these are kids, all the red that we said they were in trouble, right? They failed our screening, they need intervention, and they actually passed the year-end test, okay? So, you have to question, either the system is delivering really excellent intervention that in the meantime, which causes those kids to look like false positive errors, which was probably not the case in this data set, I'll just tell you, knowing the data set. But this is actually a pretty common picture, and this is the way most screening works. So typically we are making a lot of false positive errors in order to avoid making false negative errors, okay? So like, for example, if we move this bar over to capture these false negative errors, probably all of these turn red then, right? If we move this bar to the left to try to prevent some of these red false positive errors, we're going to end up with more false negative errors. And so typically in academic screening, we are setting that criterion to privilege avoiding false negative errors, okay? Which another way to say that is we're privileging promoting false positive errors because it really is a direct trade-off typically, okay? There are some kind of shady things that can go on in academic screening. So in some, you have to be careful because sometimes there's like this middle band of risk where we say, definitely at risk, definitely not at risk, and kind of in the middle is maybe some risk or something like that. Well, that's not really actionable. And my advice to you is that you both take action based on being either in the some or the definitely at risk category, and or at least you go to the data source and evaluate what your accuracy will be if you depending on which course you take. Because sometimes what happens when there are 3 bands of risk is the accuracy indicators are calculated on being in the definitely at risk or the definitely not at risk, and the not and the some, maybe we're not sure, are excluded from the analyses. And then that of course will inflate your accuracy, and you will think you're going to have this much more accurate screening than you do in reality, okay? So it's just worth it. It's worth taking a look, and you should take a look. And of course, you can go to the NCII tools chart to evaluate screening tools in reading and math, and at least know with confidence that you are adopting a measure that has really great technical adequacy evidence before you deploy it in your system. So what happens is, we screen, these are the kids who are at risk, but we most often see this, okay? And this is true all over the country. And when we see this, there is really no way to distinguish, this kid from this kid from this kid. There's truly not. And the problem is, in many systems, what the screening model looks like is you screen and then you just take your lowest performing X% of kids, and those are your kids who will get intensified instruction. And that is an extremely error prone model. I mean, it really should be summarily abandoned. I've been saying this for more than a decade now, publishing data demonstrating this, and vendors are slow. They're slow to change their methods, but this model of working with the X% lowest performing kids on a screening is extremely error prone when you have a lot of risk. You will make false negative errors at a very high rate, and you will also make false positive errors. So what's a better alternative? Well, the better alternative, and certainly, I think this case now has been made successfully enough in research and in concept pieces. I've been personally writing about this particular thing since about 2010. And now most scholars in MTSS have pretty widely accepted that you've got to have a layer for class-wide intervention, because it is the only way to make your screening function for you and accurately tell you who's in trouble when you have a lot of risk in your environment, which many places do, especially after COVID, right? So what happens is, when you have class-wide intervention implemented as part of your screening process, then you can harvest, the information. It's not new assessment. It's bringing benefit to these students, and at the same time, it's giving us really great information about who's in trouble. And in this case, it's this kid right here. This would be the one that we want to take a deeper look at. So it becomes, class-wide intervention becomes the second gate in your screening process. And this happens because this orange line is negative post-test probability. And this is the probability that a child who has passed your screening will fail your year-end test, okay? And what happens is, this is mathematically tied to, inextricably, unavoidably, to your base rate of risk in your environment. And by the way, it does vary a little bit, given a more accurate, let's see if I included that. I'll go ahead and show it, yes. But the pattern's the same. So this dashed line is for measures that have sensitivity and specificity of 0.70. This solid line in the middle is sensitivity and specificity of 0.80. And this one, which is the one I modeled on the last slide, is sensitivity and specificity of 0.90. So we really don't do better than that. So the best case scenario, when you have 50% or median score in the risk range, you're already at a 10% negative post-test probability for a really, really accurate screener. And that pattern is 20%. And by the way, this is really the zone in which most of our screening accuracies fall. So in effect, if you've got 50% of your class looking like they are at risk, you cannot use screening to rule anybody out, because your error rate of missing kids who really needed intervention just becomes so high that the measure is not useful anymore. So that's the sort of technical explanation for that. And then, of course, the kind of case example friendly example is here, which is, you got a class-wide problem, you give class-wide intervention, and this is a real case, so we could go back and see who was identified for individual intervention based on response to class-wide intervention. These are the 4 kids, okay? And I should have said class-wide intervention data, not screening data, because you're looking at the screening data. And these were the ones that failed to respond to class-wide intervention. What's interesting is, this is a nice visual way to see, if you took your bottom 20%, you're missing these 2, right? That's a 50% miss rate for kids who needed intervention. And to work with these, you probably worked with at least 2 or 3 additional children who you didn't need to work with. And then we wonder, why intervention is not giving us a good return on our investment in systems. Well, we have to be smarter about who we are recommending. All right, so if you'd like more information, and I'm about to send you to a breakout group to kind of talk about these takeaways, these are all links that will take you to places where you can learn more. This bottom one is the tools chart at NCII, which I always recommend. And then, of course, these are my takeaways. So now what I want to do is send you into your breakout for 8 minutes, and I'm going to let the patent folks explain it. Should I stop sharing for this?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I have the your school in alphabetical order. So when I open all breakout rooms, you'll see your schools in alphabetical order. Also, there's also a breakout room for IU TAC consultants, unless you would like to attend one of the breakout rooms for schools that you support. And there's also a breakout room for those districts that may be in attendance that aren't a part of the series. After each of the schools' names, you'll see either a C, that means Central Region, a W is for West, and an E is for the Eastern Region, just in case IU TAC personnel or patent consultants want to kind of go back and forth in between rooms.
Welcome back. Okay, welcome back. So I'll set you up a little better when you go out for your next breakout, which will be pretty quickly. But this purpose of that breakout was really to talk about screening, your screening process. How do you think your system contends with screening? Do you know which measures you use, and are they accurate? And do you know, for example, do you use too many screenings? That's the most common problem in reading, is that children are overzealously screened. I was on a panel one time overseas with John Hosp and Matt Burns, and I heard John say this, that some systems that he had worked with believed that if they had 3 sort of reading initiative type programs, that they had to have a different screener for each program. That is not true. Always, economy of screening is just smarter practice, because when you do over collect screening data, what you actually do is reduce the chances that people will know how to act on those data. You're really inviting paralysis by analysis. So, certainly this is true in reading and in math. Brief, direct skills measures are best. And the big distinction between reading and math is that for reading, we've got oral reading fluency. La, la, la. I mean, you can't beat oral reading fluency. It is just a dynamite measure. I mean, it's wonderful. It was not invented by Standino. It came from precision teaching. The first person who I know who wrote about that was Clay Starlin, and he wrote specifically in 1971 about recording words and phonemes read correctly per minute. Did you know that? The directions that conventionally became CBM, he wrote about starting in 1971 and subsequent years as well. So oral reading fluency was a win, right? That was a big find, and we don't have that in math. We've all looked for it, but also in reading, oral reading fluency doesn't tell you everything you need to know. So when you find risk and you're trying to build an intervention, you are going to have to sample back through a hierarchy of skills, and you're going to want to use brief, we call them targeted, direct skill measures of those sub-skill proficiencies in order to plan your intervention, in order to, I know Matt Burns talks about this a lot in reading, about how you construct your small groups to where they are focusing on the same area of need and the content that you're working in, right? And we do this in math too. It's the same kind of idea. So we say use mastery measures in math. And if you'd like to read a paper about that, this one is on my ResearchGate site. That's the link to it that you could read. And it's a practitioner-friendly article that we published in the Communique last year. Just so you know, when you go to my ResearchGate site and pull articles, they're always the preprint version, just because of copyright agreements. But I never put anything on ResearchGate until it has actually been published. I don't put preprints up. I don't do that because I think it threatens anonymous peer review. I just haven't figured out how I feel about that yet. I know the younger generation puts all their stuff up. I don't do that. So if it's there, it has actually gone through peer review and has been published. But it looks like a preprint because that's what you are allowed to share as an author in a space like ResearchGate. You can also always email me for an article. I'm happy to share them that way too. So, the other thing about screening is you really don't need 3 screening data points per year. You only need 2. And the reason I say that is, you really don't want to come and do a measure between March and May for the purpose of identifying children for intervention, right? If you've got highly mobile kids who have moved in, you can certainly give them a screening, but as a system, 3 times a year is not really useful for screening. So here's what I say about the 3rd data point, which is spring. That's for program evaluation. And that becomes very powerful because that is an opportunity for you to select deliberately rigorous measures to reflect how you are moving your entire program of learners through over the course of the year. So you want those measures to just give you growth information about gains that you have seen during the course of the year. They need to be sufficiently rigorous because you want them to forecast that kids are ready for the next level of instruction the following year. So my advice is harvest your fall and your winter data points to determine risk. If you have a high base rate of risk defined as a median score in the risk range, deliver a high quality class-wide intervention. I know Matt has presented in your state a lot about his model of class-wide reading intervention. I have certainly presented in millions of times on class-wide math intervention. Probably you can find recorded sessions online that you could watch if you want to learn more specifically about class-wide math intervention, although I'm going to talk about it a little bit today. And then use your 3rd data point in the spring for program evaluation purposes. One trial, one decision. This, triangulate your data drives me crazy. That's old advice. Frankly, it's bad advice. If you have to triangulate it, you need better measures. You need more useful scores. There has to be a better way. We would never say, a drug of some pharmaceutical intervention is sufficient if we have to give you 3 things every time, 3 types of antibiotics to have any chance of making having a good effect on your illness. No, I mean, we just need to use better tools, right? And use better tools, one trial, one decision. You save a lot of time when you do that. And of course, I just don't know another way to deal with base rates than to use class-wide intervention. Adding more measures does not help you get a more accurate decision or a more efficient decision. That's really important because the first thing that will happen, and maybe this came up in some of your breakout sessions, is people would say, well, let's add a measure, right? That is sort of like the natural answer. And it turns out that's all a giant waste of time because, the measures that we use tend to generate scores that are highly correlated. So giving measures that generate highly correlated scores concurrently is not giving you unique and different information that you can use to make a better decision. Does that make sense? It's just more of the same. And in fact, what will happen is you'll get a few disagreements because you'll never have perfect agreement. And then that becomes all the focus and eats all the bandwidth is talking about which one is right. And inevitably somebody will say, what do we need? Another measure. So one trial, one decision, and use your follow-up intervention to become more accurate about who you're recommending for intensified instruction like tier 3. Okay, so here is what we recommend in math. Because math is different. I mean, in reading, it's really pretty easy for me because at first grade, we're using oral reading fluency. That's what I would use, and that becomes very simple. Now, our sub skills that we might drill down in to figure out where your exact need for intervention is would be more specific, specific sub skills. But for the most part, we can get a lot of leverage from oral reading fluency. That is not true in math. There is no oral reading fluency equivalent. So in case you are not using spring math, this is what I recommend for screening. And you'll notice that these are extremely rigorous screenings, and they do increase in difficulty from fall to winter to spring. You have these slides, so I'll let you sort of look through these on your own. But the reason I show it is I think the old model, the original CBM model in math, was an idea that we could measure, single digit whole number operations, maybe a fraction measure if we really wanted to push the envelope, and we would make these really wonderful decisions about risk in systems and with individual students in math. And those measures are just to me, just I don't want to diminish them. I love that research was attempted, but they were a swing and a miss. So we've moved on from that. And we know we need high quality, technically adequate, well-controlled measures of more rigorous understandings that we can identify that really map onto this long-term trajectory at these little windows of time, grade levels, from numeracy to algebra. And for my money, these are the ones that count. And again, we've been at this for about 20 years of trying to build and refine screening measures in math. And another takeaway is, if you are beginning to think about doing math MTSS, and writing is probably a really easy analogy to make. If you're thinking about doing writing MTSS, it is bad advice now to say to systems, go build your own measures, because they're quote unquote free. I lose my mind over that advice, because first of all, the work involved to build a set of measures is enormous. It's not free. It would be cheaper to just buy something that has a good set of measures with published technical adequacy data. In effect, it's tantamount to bad advice, because what you're really ensuring is that systems will not do the work, because people do not have time, and they generally do not have the resources and the skill set to go out and create and build the measures that they need. So, I still see that. I see it on Facebook sometimes, and I think I push back every time I see it now. I have seen my colleagues give this advice, and I have begun to challenge them both, privately and publicly, to say, that's really bad advice now, because we really have an ethical mandate as decision makers, school psychologists, to adopt tools that have demonstrated technical adequacy for the types of decisions that we are trying to make. And this is knowable to us now. And you can go to that, again, I always recommend the NCII tools chart, because their process is so rigorous and it is so transparent. And you can know, with some degree of certainty, how well a measure should work for your individual context before you try it. And that's really important. It's really important. When we built our measures, I started this work, it would have been around 2008. And I've built an assessment generator twice in my career. And over the course, to generate what we do now, we generated and tested over, I think, 49,000 problems. It took years. It took me 3 years the first time. It took me 3 years the second time to build a generator. And of course, we have an ongoing program of research where we are really continuing to put these under a lens and make sure that they really, really function and work for us. So it is not good advice to say, hey, just go build your own measures. It's better advice to say, go and adopt the best available measures. And if literally you need a type of measure that does not exist, that you cannot locate, then you may have to build it, but you have an ethical obligation to study it and verify its adequacy before you make high stakes decisions with it. All right, just concrete example. What do I mean by some of these, since subskill measurement might be new to you? This is just an example of a kindergarten measure where the child's job is to circle the greater quantity, the one that is more, we say, with kindergarten kids. And you can see we always work a sample problem. There's standard directions, and we do have very specific frustrational, instructional, and mastery criteria for all of the measures that we use, because you have to have that to be able to take action on the data. This would be a first grade measure, so solving for an unknown, a missing number in an addition or a subtraction problem. We call these fact families in addition and subtraction. This is a second grade measure that involves probing a child's ability to decompose tens and ones to create an equivalent addition expression or subtraction expression. Which is how adults solve those, by the way, without sitting down with a piece of paper and a pencil. You just decompose. That's how everybody does it. Makes difficult math work less challenging, which is a life skill in math. This is an interesting measure because most fourth, fifth, and sixth graders cannot do this with great success and need class-wide intervention for these skills. That's actually a third grade measure though for the fall. This is a fourth grade measure. It's another fact family, this time for multiplication and division, adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. That's one of our fifth grade measures for screening. Distributive property of expression is a sixth grade measure. Translating verbal expressions into math equations is a seventh grade measure. And adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing with exponents is an eighth grade measure. Okay, just to make it concrete. And what we know is now that we have begun to really conduct a research on all of these measures at scale. This is an example of a series of G studies that Ben Solomon and I ran right before the world shut down. We collected these data in December of, it would have been 2019. Late December of 2019. And we found that you can actually make really good decisions with a single trial. So one score helps you make pretty reliable decisions, especially about risk. So for all of these measures, and for the most part, there was very little variance explained by what we call the probe form itself. So that allows us to be confident that when we generate a measure for you, it's not more difficult or less difficult, it's of equal difficulty, so that we know that your growth is real growth, or your lack of growth is real lack of growth and wasn't caused by the measure being slightly easier or slightly more complicated. And yet this is really important in the math space, because you don't want to use the same problems every time, because you do get familiarity effects. So that now has been tested. I love it. Ben calls these Goldilocks measures, because this really has been a really aggressively novel approach to math assessment in MTSS. I'm using those words intentionally. I felt like I was the only one doing it and saying it for years and years. And now, there are other people extending this work and finding similar things. And Ben Solomon is one of them. And I work with him some and adore him. And he called these Goldilocks measures. So, unlike a GOM, like an oral reading fluency that you give, over and over, and you can model growth at least seasonally, in math, the measure has to change. So it has to advance in difficulty, because mixed skill computation measures are just not sensitive for screening, and they are not sensitive for monitoring progress. And Ben describes these as the Goldilocks measures. It's exactly right for that right moment in instruction. And that is exactly how we operate with different measures at fall, winter, and spring. Okay. And sometimes that is confusing to places, because they go, well, then how can you look at growth? And you know what? I can absolutely talk about that, and I'd be happy to talk about that. But there are lots of ways to model growth. You don't have to just look at rate of improvement. You can look at things like rate of skill mastery, when all things are sort of similar, right? So that's how we look at skill mastery. We look at that situated in classrooms, receiving core instruction with the same kids, receiving class-wide intervention with the same level of fidelity delivered by the same adult. And then relative rate of skill mastery in that context becomes really meaningful, and relative rate of skill mastery by classroom within a grade, within a school, becomes also similarly meaningful. And we can drive much more actionable decision recommendations or action recommendations for your school based on looking at the data in that way. And that should be something that, like if I had a spring reading, if I had built a spring reading, and for the record, I tried to get Matt Burns to do it when I built what now is called Spring Math, and he just didn't want to do it, didn't want to allocate the effort, the time, the money, the investment, because I funded my first effort. He didn't want to do it, so he passed. He should have done it, but we would have built it the same way. So we would have been harvesting reading data in that kind of way, which I really wish systems would figure out how to do. That's what I would do. So another thing, this paper just finally got accepted this last Friday. It was in the revise and resubmit process for a while. I think because we pushed the envelope. So Ben Solomon and I wrote this paper. I'm the first author on this one. And this is based on my observation that fluency and accuracy are really redundant information in CBM, okay? And what I mean by that is, let me say this in non-jargon way. If you meet the criteria that we expect you to meet for proficiency, you are not making errors, right? And honestly, if we're detecting errors, that may just reflect more error in our assessment than the natural course of human behavior, because what we find is that by and large, it's redundant information, all right? But it has been conventional in CBM from the very beginning to include an accuracy recommendation in every space, right? So we'll say, I think Dibble says in reading that you've got to have, X words read correctly per minute at 98% accuracy, right? So we tested this, and we have hundreds of data sets, and certainly in math, and we actually included some reading data in our paper as well. And what we demonstrate is that actually, like, if you sort kids on their fluency scores, so this looks real in ascending order, right? So this looks very systematic, upward trend. And then for every kid, this is their fluency score. These are their percent correct on the time CBM assessment in this one's in math. Looks the same in reading, okay? But what you can see is, look what happens. Like, all of the really low percent corrects are also at the low rate behaviors, so low fluency behaviors, okay? And it's really, really unstable. And oh, by the way, the range is really restricted. So, of course it ceilings out at 100%. We know that, here's that value. But it actually has a floor effect too. You really don't have any kids scoring below, 40, 50% accuracy. So you're only using half the range of this metric. So it's extremely constrained, and it is exactly this constraint which is most pronounced for children with low fluency scores, that causes the accuracy metric to be essentially worthless. And we demonstrate this in a number of analyses in our paper. So one of our reviewers said, well, sort it the other way. Sort it based on percent correct, and suddenly fluency will look unstable. Okay, well, so we did that. That's fair enough. But it still sort of makes the same point, which is you've got all of these children sitting over here at 100% accuracy, okay? The 100% from here to here, all right? And this also includes children who are reading, scoring 2 digits correct in 2 minutes, okay? All the way up to the peak of, what is that one? 133 digits correct in 2 minutes. So the problem is, you're going to say, the teachers will say, well, these kids have got it, and in fact, they're in trouble. So what we say is, accuracy really does not add anything to your decision rule about who needs intervention. And now, do you want to pay attention to accuracy when you are delivering intervention? Yes, you might, and therefore you may score it, because it might be a target for you just to establish accurate responding before you start building fluency. But you can actually make a decision about the generally whether or not you need acquisition or fluency building or generalization opportunities based on a fluency score alone, because it's largely redundant information, and fluency is going to be much more sensitive. That's what those data points show you right there. Okay, if you would like to read more about this research, which we are always doing, these are all on my ResearchGate site. These are links directly to some of these research articles. It's a variety. Some of them are, one of them, the first one is a communique paper. So that's our NASP outlet. So directed to practitioners. And then the others are more, scholarly articles. The one reporting these data is now officially accepted. So I would imagine as soon as I receive that official communication where I sign over the copyright, I will put the preprint up it will be published online first, and then I will put it up on my ResearchGate site so you could read that piece if you want to. And then the other thing is there's a woman named Lexi Payne who's Ben Solomon's student, and she just conducted this really beautiful dissertation examining the accuracy of decision rules in class-wide intervention. And she happened to use Spring Math because we were able to, I was on her committee, and then of course we were able to gift her a data set that was de-identified that she could use to conduct her study, which was just remarkable. And interestingly enough, she found that for roster sizes over 10, requiring the median to reach mastery before moving children on with one data point was a highly accurate, extremely accurate way to make decisions during class-wide intervention. And what I'll tell you is if she had found something different, we would have changed our rule. I am agnostic and atheoretical when it comes to advancing student achievement. I really just want to grow math improvement, so math performance. So anyway, she did find that you're perfectly valid. You're not making a bad decision. You're not making errors in your decisions when you move on after your median hits mastery. So that was music to our ears, because that's the way I recommend the use of class-wide math intervention and class-wide intervention in general. So here's that picture of that triangle that you all have seen millions of times, because the people who really built it the first time were in Pennsylvania. This is our current version. We have added tier 1.5. I hear this book, I believe it when I see it, is available for pre-order and is out now, but you know, it's been a very long in-press process with Guilford. So yeah, actually I'm going to animate this slide because this one is a little easier to understand when it's animated. All right, we are headed into, break time. Well, actually, this is a perfect time to take a break. So let's do our break, and do we say 10 minutes for?
Yep, 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:18.
Perfect. Okay, back at 10:18 your time, and we will cover instructional hierarchy and then implementation updates.
Thank you.
Turn it off. Okay, welcome back from the break. So what we're segueing into now is models of intensification. And then I'm going to give you one example of class-wide intervention. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to do it. I have the slides. I'm curious if we have anybody or a good number of people who are on for whom that's a novel concept and you want more sort of basic how-to information. Instead, I'm going to assume you kind of have some working experience with class-wide intervention in your state and kind of give you some of the contemporary updates of what we're learning, because we really are studying that at scale now and learning all kinds of exciting things. So, oops, let me share my screen again. All right, so models of intensification. Because this one's animated, let's pop in and do it this way. Okay, all right. If you master this, okay, this could really kind of change your life. I don't want to oversell it, I mean, really, but it could really change your life. Models of intensification in MTSS in the early days, you know, we just got it wrong. We made our best effort, but we all said things like, well, you know, if you give it for a longer period of time, it's more intensive. If you do it more often, it's more intensive. If you do it one-on-one, that's a more intensive model of intervention delivery. Not really true, as it turned out. We've learned a lot since 2003 when Sharon Vaughn wrote that great paper that I think caused some of that approach. Because, you know, that was where we started. And what we have learned is there are really more sophisticated ways to approach intensification. And NCII, again, is a great resource for some of this information. They've got some wonderful models that they use. And I'm going to make a sort of hopefully a database case for how you can intensify and better align core instruction. You can intensify instruction for tiers 2 and 3 by being more precise about what your learners need based on their performance, okay? And it's a model of the instructional hierarchy. So if we plot every child's performance on a scatter plot for a fluency score on the x-axis and an accuracy score on the y-axis, well, you know, we've got a ceiling of 100%. So no matter if it's reading, math, writing, probably all kinds of behaviors are going to look exactly like this. And what happens in schools is teachers are often paying attention to accuracy. I mean, one of your takeaways for some of the data that I presented is be skeptical of decision models that rely on accuracy, especially if children are not exposed to a very large number of items in an untimed way. You should be a little bit skeptical of accuracy as a metric that's going to help you drive MTSS. But when teachers use accuracy, they might say that these children who are above the 90% accurate mark are ready for more challenging instruction, for more difficult content in math, okay? But what we know is that children who are to the left of this dashed line are in what we call the frustrational range of performance, which, by the way, it's frustrating to be in the frustrational range of performance because that's where all the errors are. Between these two zones, we call this the instructional range of performance, and between these, above to the right of this final dashed line, we call that mastery performance. Frustrational performance is frustrating because that's where all the errors happen, right? So if you notice, you only see low accuracy scores in this zone. Pretty much once you enter what's considered the instructional range of performance, errors have gone away, right? We only have one case here that's below 80% accurate, who is, you know, more than 40 digits correct in 2 minutes. So the instructional range of performance is where again, it's like, this is a great thing for you to know. This is where you can get this beautiful uptick in growth. You literally get an uptick. You get more rapid acceleration of learning or performance when you enter the instructional range. Errors have gone away. Learning upticks if you give the right instructional opportunities, primarily a high dosage of opportunities to respond. And we know that children by and large are accurate in this phase of learning. That's why using an accuracy criterion does not help us make a more accurate decision about what you need, okay? And then once we're in this zone of performance, which is the mastery range of performance, this is the generalization and adaptation, and I'm gonna collapse those into one category and talk about them as generalization because they are both forms of generalization. So this is the type of performance that is characterized by a very high probability that you will retain what you have learned and that you will be able to use what you've learned to solve novel problems, to read new passages, to comprehend what you are reading, to write, maybe even write a passage about something you have read. In math, this looks like, you know, solving applied problems. This is flexible, adaptable skill use. Okay. But what happens is when a teacher says that these children are ready for more advanced instruction, we know that these children are not going to retain. They're not going to remain accurate. They're going to begin to make errors. They are not going to be able to solve this problem type, you know, 3 months down the road. They will not experience faster learning of related, more complex skills. And that's true for math, but that's true for writing, for example. So as you move into more advanced writing instruction, they will not experience faster success in ways that they should because they didn't really master the fundamental prerequisites. We know that these children, alternatively, these are the children who absolutely are ready for more advanced work. But look at this. I mean, most of our kids are back here, right? So what we want to do is be moving all of these children forward to this zone of performance so that we know they are ready and positioned for longer term success. So that's the model of intensification that I like to use. And here's the original source, which, you know, you can't get it anymore. Some of you might still have this book, the fourth R, Research in the Classroom, clever title. And oh, you know, I always mention this to this audience because I know you all are familiar with the with people who have read this book and are very influenced by this book, who then do training in your state. when we were writing our second edition of our book, I tried to reach out to these authors because I was convinced that they use the word adaption in their chapter. And I was convinced it was a typo because it made no sense. And why would you have two names, adaptation and adaption, for the same thing? And this is back in the days, 1978, that everything was, typeset on a page. And so anyway, one author, Marie Eaton, is retired but still alive. She's the only one who I could find that was still alive. And she did respond to me and she did confirm that was a typo. So it really is just generalization and adaptation. And according to their definition, generalization was stimulus generalization and adaptation was really response generalization. So I call them both generalization because they're two forms. No need to confuse people with another term, right? But this summarizes some of that. And now is your opportunity for your second breakout. I'm going to show you, when you come back, class-wide intervention as a model of intensification that is situated as a fluency building intervention delivered universally for students. Then for tier 3, we can drill down and determine, do you need acquisition support, fluency support, generalization and adaptation opportunities? But typically our interventions live in either acquisition or fluency. And by definition, the instruction has to look different. You have to deliver different instruction depending on whether a child is frustrational or instructional in their performance. So when children are in the frustrational range of performance, they need tactics that look like those that are summarized on this slide. Salient cues, frequent and high level prompting, immediate corrective feedback. That's the number one active ingredient there. The feedback will be more elaborate. They need exemplars of correct and incorrect responses. They need very controlled task presentations. When you're in the fluency building stage of learning, your goal now is not to build accuracy, but instead to make it easier for children to display with accuracy the performance that they have acquired. So you want to build accuracy plus speed, or we don't have to hide behind the word automaticity, just say fluency. It's not a dirty word. There is no field that diminishes fluency but education. I mean, surgeons work on fluency in their training. Pilots work on fluency, musicians, athletes, and guess what? Our students deserve high quality fluency building instruction, period, every day. And I don't use the word automaticity because I like the definition of fluency. It is an appropriate definition. So that's what I use. I mean, you can use automaticity if you want. I don't have to have a beef about that, but I'm just saying, don't be afraid to say the words fluency. That's not fair to demean something that is of such enormous benefit to human learning. So what do we do to build fluency? Intervals of practice, opportunities to respond. That's it. That's the big one. Delayed corrective feedback. Why? Because they're already accurate. Goals and reinforcement for more fluent performance. Okay. So now what I want you to do is go into this 8-minute breakout and talk about what does your model of MTSS intensification look like in your system, and try not to get, if people in your group start to talk about structures, question it, push back a little bit, ask about not just where a kid goes, but what is actually happening that makes that instruction more intensive. And if anybody wants to kind of share some of that out in the chat when we come back, please feel free to do that, but process that with your teams, and we will come back in, let me stop sharing, in 8 minutes.
Sounds good, Dr. Vanderheyden. And also for our friends in the West, the California area school district.
If you had an aha moment in your group, if you had an aha moment, you want to share that out in the chat. I'm sure people will appreciate that. Okay, so all right, let's start with this. If you have heard, and I can see so many of you just on my screen, I'm not sharing my slide yet. You can do a thumbs up just visually. If you've heard you cannot intervene your way out of a core problem, give me a thumbs up. Yeah. I mean, you get it, right? You understand the wisdom of that statement, but guess what, people? You also can't just wait for it to go away, right? You have to intensify instruction when you discover core problems, systemic problems. You're going to have to repair learning gaps that have occurred in the context of weak instruction, while you are also hopefully shoring up core instruction. So I just feel that that particular advice has been overplayed, because what some people interpret that as is, well, I just have to wait until everything is fixed about core instruction before I can ever do MTSS. Wrong. MTSS is your vehicle to push some leverage, some improvements into your core instructional practices. And one of your best methods to do that is to institute class-wide intervention, okay? So people are asking about models of class-wide intervention. I think mine is pretty good. I began building it back in the 90s, really modeled after Charlie Greenwood's class-wide peer tutoring model. I say inspired by Charlie Greenwood's class-wide peer tutoring model. The PALS, peer assisted learning strategies model, was also inspired by Charlie Greenwood's class-wide peer tutoring model from the 90s. In fact, I think he did some of that work in the 80s. In fact, I know he did in the 80s. And so this came to be my model, which unfortunately I gave it the title class-wide math intervention, which is just a terrible title. But when I say class-wide math intervention, for math, I'm talking about a very specific model. And it happens to be my model, which is part of our platform. It's at Spring Math. There's a very specific way that we approach it. There are very specific active ingredients embedded there. And then of course our outcome data are attached to that particular arrangement of activities that we call class-wide math intervention. So, what are those? Well, first of all, you can navigate here to get a protocol to try it out. This is a picture of our webpage, and you can click sample class-wide intervention, which will actually give you a class-wide intervention protocol. And the class-wide intervention protocol really doesn't change, but the practice materials change based on what your students need, okay? So these are the things you basically need to get started. You got to have an intervention protocol. Well, I've given you at least a model for one, okay? You have to have a sequence of skills by grade level. I'm going to go through in detail or just briefly one sequence for you. Daily practice materials. By the way, these are hard to find. We were very fortunate because we built an assessment generator, as I mentioned earlier, so we can use that to generate our practice problems to populate our practice materials that we provide for class-wide intervention. So we know we are giving you well-controlled practice materials of equivalent difficulty from day to day. You've got to have weekly assessment materials. These should be validated as measures that are reliable and sensitive to performance improvements and useful for powering your decisions. You should also have criteria for decision making. You've got to be able to graph progress, and you have to have implementation support structures. All right, so the basic ingredients of how this flows is that the teacher is going to put kids into working pairs, okay? And generally the spirit of this, is that your higher performing students are matched with your lower performing students. And by the way, if you're using, Matt Burns' model of class-wide reading intervention, partner reading, it follows the same model, right? The PALS model in reading follows the same model. So you put your higher performing students with your lower performing students in working pairs, and in each pair, somebody gets to be a worker and a helper. And then after a period of work, they trade roles, and the worker becomes the helper and the helper becomes the worker, okay? And the way I like to talk about it, because the role of the worker and the helper, let's see, I have it right here. This is a graphic actually that was made by Jared Campbell. Got to give him credit for that. Love it. But basically, I like to think of class-wide intervention as being really a behavioral model for thinking. Because as you become proficient in any skill, as a reader, as a mathematician, the job of the worker and the helper goes on inside your own head privately, okay? So to make that kind of concrete, the role of the worker is to practice, explain their thinking aloud while they are solving problems, writing the answers, and the helper is following along, watching, detecting errors, giving a hint to go back and check and repair any kind of error, go back and reread a word that they miscued. And that then they switch roles. And so if you think about it, that process eventually is thinking. That's a behavioral model for thinking, where all of that goes on in your own head. As you work some type of math work, you are also self-monitoring each level of your responding and saying, wait, does this fit with my gut? Does this seem approximately right? Do I need to back up and redo this? And that function gives you a chance to practice what we're ultimately after, which is your own independent capacity to read and solve problems. And that's how I think about class-wide intervention. So I mentioned I would cover a couple of sequences. Let me pick kind of a middle of the road. I have a kindergarten sequence of skills, I've got a 6th grade, and I have an 8th grade. So let's do 6th grade because it's in the middle. I probably should have put 3rd grade in here. But basically, in any particular area, you know, we write about in our book how to do class-wide intervention for writing, reading, and math. You do have to have a sequence of skill targets, right? And the way we do it in math is we always begin the sequence with below grade level skills. And we do that deliberately because it is a standard protocol fluency building intervention. So we really don't want children doing, you know, class-wide math intervention when they have not really acquired the understanding. If they've not acquired the understanding, they need a reteach. They need a reteach with scripted activities to, you know, promote understanding and accurate responding. It looks different than what we do in our class-wide fluency building intervention, okay? But what we do is we begin with below grade level skills and then they build. So if we get and when the way it works is everybody works on the first skill, and when the median reaches mastery, the entire class goes up to the next skill. And behind the scenes, we are reading the data and giving the teacher summary reports and telling coaches where to go help in a coach dashboard. So there's a lot to the system that I have built and believe in and use. But we're harvesting how every child in the system is responding to class-wide math intervention. And we are using those data to much more accurately tell you who needs individual intervention. So you're doing less individual intervention, but you are really on the bullseye in terms of who must have that in order to succeed. Okay, so for class-wide intervention, that's our first layer of intensification. All right, and it is that fluency building intervention. We're going to begin with below grade level skills, and you'll see if you're kind of tracking along and if you're familiar with math expectations around 6th grade, the 13th skill, the 12th skill is our first really grade level skill for 6th grade here. But we have to verify you can do all of this before we spend time here, because otherwise we could be wasting our time. I'll give you some like wonderful little data points. Oh, I wish I did have the 8th grade sequence up, but I can tell, oh, I do. Okay, all right, I can do it this way. I will tell you, in our data sets, 100% of kids who get to this skill, distributive property to simplify expressions, actually master it. And that the reason they do is we built all the proficiencies that go into being able to do this more complex skill. They're all built to mastery on the preceding skills. Okay, that's how it works. All right, and if we detect when we show up and collect your first data point that you need an acquisition lesson because you do not have a median score that is in the instructional range, therefore you need acquisition support for your class, then we will give you a lesson to establish that understanding with your students before you come back to the fluency building part of class-wide intervention. All right, the active evidence-based ingredients are just sort of summarized there. I like to give little summaries just to keep people on track. Like when I talk about class-wide intervention, these are the active ingredients that we use. And I do have a couple of videos, but I think what I'll do for time's sake, I've got a 3rd grade video and I have a high school video, and I will show either one, and I'm going to let people vote in the chat, and at the end of this little segment I will ask somebody to tell me which one was most popular, or if either, and I will show portions of that video to highlight the what it looks like in a real classroom with real kids. So we're going to use what happens in class-wide intervention to, as I showed this graph earlier, to tell you who needs intensified instruction. So it helps you this is a published research finding. It helps you be more accurate in talking about and identifying who really needs tier 3 intervention. One of the ways we can improve uptake of individual intervention is to recommend it less and recommend it more accurately. And that's the other rationale for this layer of class-wide intervention. You got to get your risk down so you know exactly who you need to work with. So these are the type of effects that we see. This comes from a randomized controlled trial. And we had 4th and 5th grade students in this particular study, very strong effect sizes. We do see, remember I said at the beginning, hallmark of an effective instructional tactic or an effective intervention is stable effects. All right, well, these are all students. Red is students who were randomly in classes that were randomly assigned to control, and blue is students who were in classes that were randomly assigned to class-wide math intervention, the way we do it, so spring math. And this is the percent of students meeting the proficiency criterion on the year-end test, and classes were equivalent at baseline before they were randomly assigned to either control or intervention. And you can see we get a nice effect for all comers, right? And then when we disaggregate our data by other subcategories, right? Do you notice the blues all roughly land around 80 or better? That's a stable intervention effect, no matter where you started in terms of risk. That's the way to interpret that. And I just want to highlight for you, because we run into things in schools. You know, I just am such a fan of teachers and an admirer of teachers. And I really believe in telling teachers the truth, because when you do that, you empower them to bring their best and solve the problems that they see in front of them. And I just think that is so powerful to help systems experience growth in the right direction. But sometimes teachers do wonky things, okay? And we have certainly seen teachers do things like exclude children from class-wide math intervention when those children are already identified for special education. And I gotta tell you, I remember Ed Shapiro years ago being one of the very first people who said, you know, in the early days of MTSS, there was some discussion about special ed being the top tier. Okay. And Ed said, if you knew Ed, he didn't just quietly say it. I mean, he vociferously, directly, without any hesitation, strongly said, no way. Special ed is not a tier in any MTSS. Children, regardless of whether they're on an IEP, not on an IEP, whatever, risk is agnostic. MTSS is agnostic. Just find the risk and fix it. Okay, and that means children on IEPs should be eligible to get whatever intervention supports they need, just like everybody else in the school in an MTSS system, which is a universal tool. And so we were able to look at those data. And if you look in the children who were on IEPs, who happened to be in math classes that were randomly assigned to control conditions, at the end of the year, their pass rate was 41%, which was consistent with really their overall baseline over time. And children who were on IEPs who happened to be enrolled in classes that were randomly assigned to class-wide math intervention, at the end of 1 year, their percent proficient was 80%. So you get this, you actually see, you can see this now in black and white or red and blue, haha, that it's a bigger effect where there is more risk, because you're fixing the risk with a very stable intervention impact. So those are very strong effects, and that is what we tend to see. Here's another summary of some of that. If you like relative risk analyses, in general, children who were in class-wide math intervention had 1/3 to 1/2 the risk of failing the year-end test than did children who were randomly assigned to control classrooms. We also know that if you look at cost effectiveness data, by the way, these are all researcher. I consider myself a researcher. Researcher created class-wide intervention tools. And over here, these are all other tools, right? Generally core programs. And I have to put them on a different y-axis because they're just not even in the same league. What you are looking at, lower is better, and it is the cost, total cost, including teacher time. So we actually account for salary and any minutes that they have to spend conducting or being trained to do the intervention We account for the salaries of the trainers. We account for the materials. We account for all of it in a very comprehensive way. It is how many dollars does it cost me to buy one standard deviation of benefit in the outcome, okay? So lower is better. And again, you can see by far, I mean, our actual costs, we're $10 per kid per year, basically, but this including everything, teacher time, materials, etc. That's our number. And it's comparable to, I would say, in the zone of these other researcher created class-wide supplementation tools, which is to say, this is a good place to invest if what you want to do is be a good steward of your resources and grow achievement in the most efficient way possible. So my takeaways are on this slide, and I've also given you a link to a publication that it's public facing. You can get to it because it's on my ResearchGate site. And it really details the science of math and class-wide math intervention as a specific example. Okay. So what are we learning? I mean, this is the part I'm excited to talk about, right? Because to me, life is an all-you-can-eat buffet of curiosity and ways to help teachers work smarter and faster and better and stronger to get better results. This is it. I literally dream about this stuff, and I cannot tell you how many times I wake up with an answer. Like this literally just happened to me in the last week, and I was away, and I was texting my people on Saturday morning at 7 a.m., waiting for it to be 7 a.m. so I could text them and go, oh gosh, I had another one in my sleep. It's a perfect solution. But part of what we can do is look to our own progress at scale with these. We've, about 100,000 kids in class-wide intervention. We need 5 million. So please spread the word. But with 100,000 kids, we can really see what works and what doesn't, and make little tweaks behind the scene. Okay, so we do know, these I've already highlighted, the first two. Class-wide intervention data are definitely superior for determining risk. A median score above mastery one time is you can make a high accuracy decision if you've got a class roster with more than 10 kids. By the way, right before that was the conclusion of that research study, we made an adjustment last year in our platform that if you have a roster size that is less than 10, we do not use a median score to advance your class in class-wide intervention. We did that deliberately because we never intended for teachers to go create rosters of 5 and 6 and 7 kids. But the thing is, teachers will use tools, and when they use them in ways that you did not advise them to do so, or you didn't intend for them to use it that way, I always say to my people, that is feedback to us, right? That there's something about it that's not working for them. So we can train, we can help, but we can also work on back-end solutions that honestly teachers never even know about. And if we know, honestly, a median gets really unstable when you've got 5 kids in your sample, okay? So we say it's unstable under 10, so we don't use a median anymore, but we use a different rule. And guess what? That rule functions better now. So we can help, even if you are using us in that way, we are preventing the misuse of resulting in a decision that means it didn't work for your 5 or 6 kids, because we want it desperately to work for your 5 or 6 kids, okay? So we do know that most children respond successfully to well-implemented class-wide intervention. And we see that these gains translate to year-end test score gains. Let me give you an idea. So I first built this 2002 in Arizona, deployed it system-wide. We had a multiple baseline across schools when we did it. That 2007 paper is still my most published, my most cited paper ever. And it was the first experimental evaluation of an RTI model. We called it just RTI back then, pre-MTSS. But in that study, we were using class-wide intervention for math, and we had a class-wide problem in that, a systemic problem in math in that district. And in the first year of implementation in reading and math, the LD rate, SLD, went from 6% of their population to 3.5%. And over that year as well, in the first school, we got a 20% increase in percent proficient on the year-end state test in 5th grade. We ultimately saw that across all grade levels and across all schools. And over the course of 3 years, every single school in that system had landed in a better than 95% proficient on math on the year-end test by the 3rd year, okay? But we did see that this little district went from about 50th percentile in the state in math performance to rank order position 1. And they did that in just a rapidly ascending way. And they have stayed there ever since. I've been gone from there since 2005. So we do see, and by the way, in that particular trial, that's from 2002 to 2005, we only ever had 2% of the screened population require intensive individual intervention, which says if you can really deploy class-wide intervention with great intention and support and success, you can actually reduce the need tremendously for individual interventions, okay? And I've spent the rest of my life chasing those effects all over, trying to help scale and help other systems attain what we were able to do on the ground there. We really have not identified subgroups who do not benefit from class-wide intervention. I mentioned one to you, which would be students on IEPs. They showed enormous benefits. So do high-performing students. So pretty much we have looked in every way we can think to look, and we see that all subgroups that we can define and disaggregate and examine demonstrate similar benefit in field trials, but also in experimental randomized control trial studies. We definitely are finding which skills are hard for kids universally. And I'm going to highlight those for you because if you're using class-wide intervention, you want to know about these. And teachers who are successful with the first 2 to 4 skills in the sequence have a much greater probability of completing the skill sequence. So now we are working on novel ways to interact with teachers through our platform and leaders to promote and to heavily focus on success in the first 2 to 4 skills. Literally, I'm in a yoga class and we're doing a core series, and I mean, I am done. My heart rate is 170. It's power heated yoga class, and I wasn't. Anyway, I was not having an easy day. And I'm in this sequence of core stuff and I just stopped. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, if I had just done the first 2, I probably would have finished the set. And me think, we see this, that's an analogy, even in your own life, there's a lot of things that it's like, if you can just do and get started, and I don't know if that's behavioral momentum. I don't know what that's about, but it increases the probability that you will finish. And we see that in our class-wide intervention sequences. So we are using that information to try to drive what we do inside the tool to support better success in the first 2 to 4 skills. Okay, so let me tell you what the sticky skills are if you happen to be using class-wide math intervention. We know for kindergarten, it's counting objects and circling answers to 20, but also let me give you a caveat on that. Most systems hit that skill in December. And December in kindergarten is about Christmas and Santa Claus and other holidays that children enjoy. And it should be, it's really okay with me because let me tell you something, by and large, our kindergarten classes in our platform finish the class-wide intervention sequence. They rock it. They do better than any other grade level. Makes a lot of sense because they don't have to do as much backfill. Okay, they're starting brand new with beginning skills, and they build kids to proficiency. And when our kids leave kindergarten from spring math, they have generally mastered, including simple sums with sums to 5 and subtraction 0 to 5 before they move on. Missing number tends to be a harder skill for our kindergarten kids, but making quantities of 10. But this is our sticky skill: counting objects and circling answers to 20. We think part of that is because it falls in December. We also think part of that might have to do with our arrangement of the objects, which encourages kids to have to count every single one in a row. So we are going to probably deploy an adjustment and study that later this year, where we group those objects so you can facilitate the more proficient kids who can identify that there is a set of 10 and then count on from there, which is great. That's how we teach eventually solving addition. So first grade fact families and second grade fact families, addition and subtraction, just those particular iterations tend to be a little stickier, meaning it takes children on average more weeks to reach mastery than it does on the other skills. Third grade fact families, addition and subtraction to 0 to 9. Isn't that interesting? Division 0 to 9 and multiplying 1 digit by 2 to 3 digits with regrouping. All right, well, this one for sure is because it's not taught by most first grade teachers. It should be, it is expected in most standards. So we do expect children, it's a year end skill. It's a skill that we want them to get to by the very end, but a lot of kids just never get through mastery of multiplication 0 to 9 or 0 to 10. And so then they never go to using any kind of place value to solve multiplication problems. And then guess what? In fourth grade, it jumps to 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication with regrouping, and they're completely lost. So we want children to master this. So this is something we will be targeting. Division 0 to 9, that one is interesting because it should be, if you're teaching division as solving for an unknown factor, then children should be able to handle that. And in this sequence, we also have fact families for multiplication and division 0 to 9, and children do not have trouble with that. So that is an interesting pattern there that we are paying attention to. Finally, 4th, 5th, and 6th, most systems that did get stuck. So the teachers that weren't advancing well were getting stuck in subtraction. So we made the decision this year, it was deployed for this school year, that we would change the subtraction 0 to 20 to subtraction 0 to 9. Because in fact, what we really want children to master is subtraction using place value understanding. So we want them to be, we decided it wasn't worth it to take another 2 weeks to get everybody to mastery for subtraction facts 0 to 20, but we instead target 0 to 9 and then move immediately into solving subtraction using place value understanding, which requires also mastery of 0 to 9. So we did that, and we have seen that our weeks to mastery have been cut in half in most systems. So that seems to have worked for us. The other thing that you will probably see come online very shortly is we are starting an incremental rehearsal booster for specific to subtraction 0 to 9, and it will actually start when you're working on addition, and the teacher we will say, do you have time for a 3-minute add-on? And there's a video that teaches how to solve the problem with graphics. I recorded by yours truly. I'm happy to show it to you if you want to see it. And then we run through incremental rehearsal, which my favorite researcher and author associated with that technique is Matt Burns. He does absolutely just that is probably one of his best contributions of his career. I hope you would agree in incremental rehearsal, but it works, and it especially works with technology, because the thing that's hard about incremental rehearsal is the sequencing of the actual materials. This is true in any space. So you can do incremental rehearsal as a booster for sight word acquisition. I do it all the time. I actually have some slide decks I'd be happy to send you if you want to try that out. But incremental rehearsal is very effective unless the items are not presented in the correct order. Well, technology can control for that. My opinion about technology is we want to use it in ways not to just do what we were already doing, but to do things that we couldn't do without it, right? That's how we want to leverage technology to be a good tool to help teachers get better learning. So I'll let you read through these others and observe, what your feelings are about that as you reflect on this, but you have a comprehensive list now of the actual skills universally that children tend to stub their toes on. Just point out just one thing. These are the first, like for 6th grade, these are the first 4 skills in the sequence. And they rely upon facility with whole number, single digit operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, okay? And yet we refuse to make it that simple because we need children to be able to handle place value in the context of those operations to solve those particular operations, okay? Interesting. I hope you all are interested in that. So then let's segue into how this kind of helps us leverage implementation improvements. And I think what we have to do is give people really good feedback, right? And one of the things that you will see us do is we will begin to push this in our trainings and our onboarding, in our ongoing coaching support. We offer some free coaching support that we do. I'll be attending the next one. I'll probably talk about this and ideas and ways that you can use available. We have games available for all skills in our tool. We've got word problems for every skill in our tool. We have acquisition lesson plans for whole class, acquisition lesson plans for all skills in our tool, 145 skills. So we will be teaching our people how to leverage those things to address what they know is going to be a sticky skill before they encounter it or while they're in the middle of it. We will also be integrating some of those resources right into the teacher dashboard in ways that we hope will get used. We will be tracking whether or not they get used. If they are not used, we will sunset them. We will adjust them, because we do not just believe in offering things that then are not actually used by teachers and useful to teachers. So we want people to get good feedback. And this is a picture of the relative rate of skill mastery. This happens to be a picture from our coach dashboard. In this case, nobody is sticking out like a sore thumb. But if you had one class that had mastered less content for the same intervention, then we would be recommending that you go in and visit that teacher and watch that class implement class-wide intervention. Teachers need sensitive feedback. They need to know every single day that they can do the work and taste the results immediately. And that's how you get them to keep doing the work, right? So we want teachers to see growth. And so we always, those are not real names, by the way, but we always use graphs like this. And we also have a growth tab in the teacher dashboard. It's right here, that will show you, this was the screening percent not at risk. And this is the final class-wide intervention session percent not at risk. This is very typical that we go from, 50, 60%, sometimes less than that, to 100% not at risk following class-wide intervention. I'm going to skip over our dosage graph there and just talk about what we are learning behind the scenes about intervention integrity and ways that we can be smarter in how we help systems tackle this thing, which to me is really just the linchpin of MTSS. Is we can say we're doing all kinds of things, but the extent to which we're really doing those things with quality, that's what's going to drive our results. So we know, data just don't lie. And this is a pattern of high integrity intervention implementation. This is a pattern of low intervention integrity implementation. We can actually write algorithms to capture this. And then we use those algorithms to recommend that a human, a coach, a principal, an ally, somebody in the system go and watch and help with the implementation of that intervention for a day as an in-class coaching opportunity for the teacher in a highly collaborative way. And that process is called performance feedback. But I think what I'm learning is that we really do have to reimagine how we are managing integrity. So the way we have tended to do it is to really focus on upfront training. And I think we can begin to do more. It's time to do more, right? So when we look at uptake of evidence-based instructional practices, well, we should be helping people really look at what is the incremental cost effectiveness ratio? How much does it cost me in teacher time and resources and instructional minutes and dollars to buy one standard deviation of benefit? Because if we can help people be smarter stewards about what they try to use, you'll get better use, right? You will get better uptake of an evidence-based practice. Help leaders make better decisions about which tools offer them a chance of raising achievement versus which will just, I say to leaders all the time when they ask me about which curricula to adopt, great news in math, it's a low stakes decision because none will be sufficient. You get about a weighted average effect size of 0.2 on academic achievement in math. So, you really have to be thinking about the rest of your MTSS. What is your supplementation process? How are you going to intensify? And intensification, as we talked about, hopefully you talked about in your breakouts, doesn't look like they all went over here. It has to literally be an instructional intensification. We have to be smarter about that. So help leaders make better decisions about even assessment products that help them track. How are they doing? How do they know this investment paid off or that investment did not pay off. Help them part with things that are not working so that they can make space for things that do. Helping systems shift contingencies to favor instructional practices with strong CEA results, that's cost effectiveness analysis results. That's important because systems just never want to part with things. That's my experience, right? You know, God forbid you ever had a real systemic reading problem and you solved it. Your teachers will still want to allocate the bulk of your available instructional resources to reading. I mean, chances are, if you solved a reading problem, you taught them to love reading, to really feel comfortable teaching reading, to have the resources to teach reading. They're going to vote for reading professional development. And what you have to do as a leader is say, we don't have a reading problem anymore. So we want to sustain these improvements that we have made, but we want to actually work on other areas that we can work on in our system, whether that is social emotional learning, whether that is math. I hope it is math. It needs to be math in so many places. And, you know, it's just what I follow this health guy named Dr. Peter Attia. And he interviewed somebody, I think this week or last week. And she talked about this concept in women my age of, what did she call it? Reverse dieting. So if you've ever engaged in a weight loss program and then you've had success with it, usually most people turn around and regain all of that weight, right? And if you do a thumbs up, probably everybody's doing a thumbs up. I can't see you because I'm sharing my screen. But we know that happens. So she talked about this concept of reverse dieting, and it's nothing other than a fading process, a gradual release of the instructional intensification practices that you installed in order to fix your reading problem until you find that sweet spot where you can sustain, but you're not over investing in a problem you don't have, you don't need to solve, okay? Requiring scholars to engage. So we've got a lot of researchers who write papers that really weren't meant for anybody who's not a fellow researcher to read. And we need, and I see trends in this direction. You know, we're now often required in various journals to write, you know, a 3-sentence jargon-free explanation of our work, or like School Psych Review this in the past couple of years began this practice of doing these. You've probably seen them. They're like 3-minute videos on your paper. I know Courtney Barrett did one for a paper that I helped write, and she did a masterful job. Requiring, this is a tough one, and I got asked this question in Michigan last week, and what I'm doing to help with this, and I couldn't give a great answer because I'm just not focused there. My focus is leveraging Spring Math to improve math achievement, K-12 across the United States. And my plate is full, but requiring institutes of higher ed to update their training models. In reading, in math, in writing, there is too much academic freedom to allow professors to, you know, ideographically determine what they choose to teach. And that favors whatever people's, you know, unique research areas of research are, or what they happen to be most interested in. And that is a flawed model, because our job in IHEs, Institutes of Higher Ed, is to prepare the professionals who will then work with our children. And the work is too important. So we owe it to those children to equip these folks to really bring effective tactics and techniques to the work that they do. Help systems conduct problem analysis. Again, that's part of being able to part with, you know, trying to solve problems you don't have, and you're missing this big glaring problem over here that you really need to focus on. De-implementing low value practices. Stop promoting pilots. I say this to systems all the time. We got that wrong. We all said it and gave that advice a million years ago that you should pilot things. But, you know, instead of piloting, I invite you to call it a scaling practice, right? And the reason why is when you say pilot, your people perceive that it's an experiment. Okay, we're going to see if this can work. Well, if you have made a good stewardship decision, you have adopted a tool for which you had enough experimental evidence to know that it could work and that it was a good fit for the needs of your particular system. Okay, so if that is the case, you're not pilot testing whether or not it can work. You're scaling it to make sure it works in your particular host environment. And that is a different purpose. And when you call it a pilot, the other thing is nobody's looking at the data in most systems. So pilots are a low value practice, in my opinion, because nobody really runs a pilot and actually analyzes their data. Most people don't do program evaluation. So in Spring Math, we actually do it for you and give you your program evaluation every year. You can upload your own measures. We'll give you a dosage and a results report. It's all, we built that out. We never raised our price to accommodate that. It comes with the tool. And the idea, the reason we did it is we know that is an essential activity for local leaders to undertake to get better learning in place in your system. So, in-house program evaluation will absolutely change your life. That's a point on my next slide. Assist systems to be accountable to their investments and results. And remember, like I said, nothing is free. Be smarter about conflicts of interest and how to maximize rate of improvement and return on investments. Actually what I meant by that for systems, because everybody has COIs. We all have COIs. And when somebody says, oh, here's these materials, they're free. Well, if they're less effective and they're free, then what you did with your system was actually more costly, okay? And so we can't continue to think about cost effectiveness analyses in such overly simplified ways. We must be able to attend to what is the ease of use? What is the accuracy of use? What are the effects that we observe, not just in researcher controlled and implemented RCTs where the researchers ran all the interventions and used very proximal measures to reflect their outcomes, but in real trials in real classrooms where real teachers did the work using the training that you would have access to. I mean, that's what we want to do, is be smarter about how we select those practices. Okay, I pretty much said all of that. So here's what we do typically in integrity management. We see that something's not working, sort of, not that we had a good program evaluation. We then add components to it. Inevitably, that's what systems want to do. This both increases the complexity and decreases the probability of correct use, which lessens or increases the problem of innovation not working. So it's this hopeless cycle where we really are not hitting the bullseye. We are not moving the ball down the court. And what we want to do instead is think about implementation as a behavior, right? So there are antecedent things you can do that are known empirical benefits to implementation, and there are consequence things that you can do that have known empirically demonstrated benefits to implementation. Okay, and there they are summarized, okay, from research. Again, people I would cite for that are people like old school, Joe Witt, George Knoll, Steve Elliott, Frank Gresham, who originally wrote about some of these things and studied some of those things. So let me give you, I'm going to use my platform as a sort of concrete model, okay? One of the antecedent things that you can do to improve use, improve uptake, is improve the efficiency. So if you minimize the work by using more accurate assessments, by using more accurate processes to deal with high base rates, for example, then what you're doing is you are actually, that is an antecedent strategy to enable better implementation of individual intervention, because you're asking people to do less of it, so they have more space to do it. You can do this very specifically by using screening rules that minimize false positive errors in your model. You can use implementation support in classes that are using class-wide intervention to avoid over-identification of students for more intensive instruction. So specifically, when class-wide intervention is not being implemented well, and there are 3 metrics we track to tell you very precisely where that's happening, if you go in and address that problem, you'll end up with fewer kids looking like they need intensive intervention. You can minimize deliberately the complexity of your intervention. We try to do this all the time in every way we can think of. So these are just some highlights that are things that we do to try to minimize complexity. The assessments are brief with standard instructions printed right at the top. We score and answers correct, and we give answer keys because that is much easier and we can do it equally accurately than scoring digits correct. We do all the assessment data. We interpret the data for you. When you ask people you give them a data dump and ask them to interpret it, most systems get lost in it and reach conclusions that don't really lead to effective course corrections to benefit students. Intervention protocols for us are always scripted. We never want a teacher to ever have to go outside of our platform to obtain materials. The only thing that we ask teachers to bring to the table, period, K-12, are kidney beans. Everything else we provide, and we just can't figure out how to deliver kidney beans from the computer. By the way, we very much believe in paper and pencil work with kids. We believe in hands-on counting and number lines. Really with students, we see tremendous benefit. And I believe, hopefully our COVID experience kind of drove that home because these digital models of intervention just aren't as effective. All materials needed to implement the intervention for us are always provided. We never say, go get word problems, we provide them. And we know they're well controlled and they're well done that way, okay? Another antecedent, improving the teacher skill to implement. So we want to use what we can in technology to be better about this, right? Very few people have an appetite to go sit in a 3-hour session, but if I'm trying to do something and then you give me a just-in-time support to do that work, that's going to be more helpful to me. So video demonstrations, we actually now, because of what we're learning, we require onboard training. We do that on purpose so that we know you're ready to go. And then of course we have follow-up support systems. Automated data interpretation and recommending the next action. These are consequent strategies that we can deploy to drive better implementation. Frequent sensitive feedback on learning gains. So we're showing growth in a number of ways. We never give a summary report that doesn't tell you what action to take based on that. We never tell you to take an action without giving you everything you need to do that. So that's the model I use because I was trained by Joe Witt. People do not implement if you just suggest it and walk away. Guidance to enable performance feedback. So this is some of what we're doing that's really novel that people have not done yet. And that is we have found some novel metrics that actually outperform direct observation and tell us very sensitively where coaches need to go and help. And then I already mentioned that we provide program evaluation because it is something that we think leaders should do. And we don't think that they do it super easily. This is our flow chart for what causes you to get a coach visit. And these are the things I mentioned that we track. So we are looking at relative rate of skill mastery. We are looking at whether or not you're stuck on a skill. We're looking at a metric called score consistency, and we're looking at a metric called scores increasing. And that's the flow chart that informs whether or not we tell your coach dashboard that you need to go to have a visit. Okay, and in our final moments, just a few more kind of new ideas. We are finding that these metrics do outperform direct observation, so that's great. We want to leverage those even more. And we're learning some things that don't work. Like we've seen a tendency of teachers to not record a score for a low kid in their class on the day that the median hits mastery. When we detected that pattern, we studied those kids. And what we found is those kids have a lot of risk. So what happens is, even though we tell teachers, we train them, we beg them not to do it, we put it in the program evaluation, that missing scores, you don't have to hold back a score because we're using a median, and one low score is not going to pull your median down, but teachers don't believe it. They fear that that is going to slow down their progress of being able to move the rest of the class forward, so they just hold back the score. So what we did is I dreamed about it. I woke up and said, well, that's an easy fix. Any kid who's missing data twice when the class-wide median has reached mastery during class-wide intervention, we'll just automatically recommend that child for a diagnostic assessment, so we know we're not missing them. Because under the criteria I just described, those children had like a 3 or 4-fold increase in risk of being a false negative error. So that's just one example. And if I had $1 million, what would I do? I don't. We're not really out of the red ourselves in our particular product. But I tell you, I do say to people all the time, if you help us get more users, then we can do more things. And so we would love to embed more dynamic communication directly to teachers and parents. We would love to build an app that allows children sitting at a soccer game to practice playing a game. Their parent can hand them a phone and they can practice on the skill that is aligned with what they're working on typically in their class-wide intervention. We are mining data. We're using some predictive analytics to sort of drive some of what we push. I already mentioned the one example of helping kids master for sure in the first 2 to 4 skills. So that's my final slide. I hope we have a minute for questions, 2 minutes for questions. Because I'm supposed to stop at 10:30 my time, 11:30 your time, right? Okay, just making sure. I wish we had another half hour because then we could do a breakout and then we could come back and do a better Q&A because people could think about questions during the breakout, but that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. The chat box is re-enabled. It was temporarily disabled. So you can feel free to place your questions in the chat. We know you must have some. Thank you, Dr. Vanderheyden, for all of this content. And I know for as far as the links that have been posted, there's a request to repost those links somehow. We'll see what we can do. Know that the slide deck that you have access to, within that slide deck, you can click on the links that Dr. Vanderheyden has included throughout her presentation today. So let's stand by. Let's give people time, a little bit of wait time to post your questions. Take advantage of this opportunity as well with Dr. Vanderheyden. Any questions are welcome, whether they're team, systems, data practices. We are.
Okay, I almost feel like I'm being punked because someone has asked, is there a way to pilot Spring Math? Remember, I just said, don't pilot scale. But to your point, is there a way to try out a tool in your system? Like mine is called Spring Math. Certainly. I mean, of course you can certainly try it at a given grade level or in a school. We are pretty confident in our onboarding and support processes that we're very confident we easily spin up schools all the time to get going and get results within a year. So it is very easy for us to help you start this year. And if you are thinking about more of a scaling, I'm going to change your word pilot to scale, then the way we recommend that you do that is at the whole school level. I feel like I learned this from Jen, honestly, Jen, and some of your materials at Patton, that it's so important, and the SPDIG people highlight this too, that when you are running a pilot, that you are sampling all the layers that might be difficult, that might need some troubleshooting. And so that's why when people say, well, we're gonna try it at second grade, that's a less powerful model than trying it school wide and expanding it to new schools. So my recommendation is usually to start that at the whole school level, because that will give you a better sense of what the kinks are, which are different for fifth grade teachers than second grade teachers.
Those are great points. What we would like to do, Dr. Vanderheyden, is turn it over to Erica Kurudar, who's going to pose a question to everybody for our own training and technical assistance related to your presentation today, and that'll help us, carry on with what folks need. So, Erica, are you ready? You're muted.
Yeah, so we